Difficulty in video games is a controversial subject. Every few years, someone makes the case that all games should have an easy mode. Or at least they claim that all games would benefit from having an easy mode, or a difficulty slider, or something like that. And the arguments that they come up with are always some variation of, let people play how they want, doesn't affect you, I don't understand why you care so much. And my personal favorite, you're a bad person for not agreeing. Now, for the most part, I believe that people in favor of universal easy modes are coming from a good place. They want more people to enjoy more things, and they think that implementing an easy mode on everything will accomplish that. They worry that less adept players are missing out on valuable gaming experiences. The problem is that many of those people don't understand the opposing point of view. I believe that those arguments are misguided, and don't address what's actually being fought over. So that's the point of this video. I will attempt to explain why many of us don't think all games would benefit from an easy mode, and why I think some shouldn't have that option. To start, let's talk about Howard Moskowitz for a moment. If you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you'll know that I have something of a minor obsession with him. I'm going to retell his story because it's been a while, and it has important implications that I haven't yet discussed. Howard is a market researcher. He was hired by Pepsi in the early 1970s to figure out how much aspartame they should put in their new product, Diet Pepsi. Now, aspartame is a sweetener, so Howard did what anybody would do. He made a bunch of Diet Pepsis with different amounts of aspartame and tried to figure out which one was most popular by testing them out on thousands of people. He expected the data to result in a nice bell curve, and he would just select the most popular one. He was wrong. The data was not as clear-cut as he expected, and he didn't know why. A lesser man might have just put this out of his mind, but Howard thought about this Pepsi incident for years. He couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. And one day when he was musing about it again, the answer came to him. He had been asking the wrong questions. There was no perfect Diet Pepsi. There were only perfect Diet Pepsis. This was a big revelation for Howard, and this phrase became something of a mantra for him. He repeated it incessantly. He went to conferences and told people, "You are looking for something that doesn't exist. You shouldn't look for the perfect Pepsi. You should be looking for the perfect Pepsis." But nobody understood what he was saying. Eventually, he did get an opportunity to prove his point. He was approached by Prego. Prego asked Howard to help in developing the perfect pasta sauce to beat out their competitor, Ragu. Howard, however, thought that was a stupid idea. Prego at the time was considered to have the better, more high-quality product, but they were still losing out in sales. So Howard told them, there is no perfect pasta sauce. There are only perfect pasta sauces. With Prego, Howard set about making a variety of different sauces. These sauces varied in sweetness, visible solids, sourness, garlic content, and every way imaginable. They ended up making 45 different sauces, and journeyed across the US with all of them. Howard rented out large halls in large cities, sat people down for 2-hour intervals, and had them rate the different sauces. He did this for months, and collected an immense amount of data. Afterwards, Howard, armed with this data and the means to interpret it, came to this conclusion. In America, there are 3 types of people. People who like their sauce plain, people who like their sauce spicy, and people who like their sauce extra chunky. Now that last finding is the most important, because at the time there was no extra chunky pasta sauce. You couldn't go to the supermarket and buy it. Howard had discovered a deep craving in the mind of 1/3 of the American population that no one yet was servicing. When Prego realized what this meant, they lost their shit. They formulated a line of extra chunky tomato sauce, and that line became immediately successful. That chunky sauce alone made Prego $600 million over the next 10 years, and Howard had proven to the world that there was no perfect pasta sauce. There were only perfect pasta sauces. Now, having heard this story, here's the main question. Why was there no large chunky pasta sauce industry before Howard? It's not like Prego and Ragu had no interest in knowing. They had a huge interest in knowing. Companies desperately want to know what you want, so that they can figure out how to separate you from your money. Ragu and Prego would do focus groups. They did them for years, and they would ask people, "What do you want in your spaghetti sauce? Tell us what you want." Yet apparently, despite the money and years devoted to these sessions, no company had ever gotten a finding that made them think that 1/3 of the population wanted extra chunky sauce. Why not? Well, for 2 reasons. The first is that people falsify their preferences. If asked what kind of coffee they like, most people will say they like a rich dark roast. But according to Howard, most people are liars. In truth, only about 25% prefer rich dark coffee. The majority actually like coffee that is milky and weak. The second reason is that they couldn't tell the focus group that they liked chunky sauce because they didn't know. Most people aren't market researchers. They aren't psychophysicists. They aren't product designers or game developers either. It's not reasonable to expect them to be able to tell you what they want, especially if it's something innovative that they've never experienced. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Henry Ford. So why am I telling you this? Well, it's because one of the most common refrains in this video game easy mode argument is that you should let people play how they want, let people be happy. And I completely disagree with this statement on a fundamental level. This statement assumes a bunch of things that I think are just not true. A statement like this assumes that people are perfectly rational actors that are able to know what they want. It assumes that the player choice is always an unmitigated good. It assumes that people can perfectly understand the developer's intended experience before they've played the game. And I don't think I'm exaggerating. Look at how the argument is framed. Let people play how they want. Let people be happy. It's saying that people having the ability to do as they please will make them happy. It's saying limitations are bad. This isn't categorically true, but it's framed like it is. People don't know what they want, and what they think they want will not always make them happy. Video game developers have a vision. They have a specific experience in mind that they are trying to cultivate. They've gambled that their target audience wants this experience, and by necessity, every other kind of experience that doesn't fit in with their vision is excluded. They make decisions like, this is not a military shooter. This is not a turn-based RPG. There's a lot of things a game can't be for it to be what it is. Games have an intended experience, and a lot of the times it's not immediately apparent to the player what that intended experience is. Let me give you an example. I played The Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and I enjoyed it so much I decided to go back and give Morrowind a try. This was around my teenage years, and I had never played a PC game before. So Morrowind was not an easy thing to get into for me. It was ugly, chance to hit in combat was based on percentages that were based on stats, you couldn't fast travel whenever you wanted. It was not like Oblivion, and I was not having a good time. But my friends that had played it swore by the game, so I muddled through and finally made it to Balmora. I felt like I needed directions, so I decided to join the Mages Guild and do the questline. I joined and my first task was to gather mushrooms. Okay, fine, I have a quest now. I have some idea of what I'm supposed to be doing. So I leave the building, but as I start walking I notice I don't have a map marker. I checked my journal to make sure I accepted the quest. I had, and I reread the description. Ajira asked me to bring her samples of 4 types of mushrooms. They may be found on the swamps in the Bitter Coast. I can get there by following the river Odai south of Balmora until I see a wooden bridge. After I pass the bridge, I should look for a way over to the hills to the west. The description was so detailed that a crazy idea started to form. Am I supposed to use written directions to find my way to the mushrooms? I kinda didn't believe it. So I go back into the guild and ask Ajira about the quest. This time I click on each mushroom, and she tells me what the mushrooms look like and where they grow. And those descriptions are now links in my journal so I can check them. I was shocked. I had never played a game that thought I could follow written directions. So I head out following the river as instructed, and as I'm walking something starts to happen. You see, in Morrowind the base walking speed is really slow. Running isn't much faster, and it drains your stamina. Stamina itself refills pretty slowly, so you're incentivized to walk in case you need to use that stamina in combat. The combination of following directions and slow walking speed started to change how I was looking at the environment. All of a sudden the graphics didn't look quite so shitty. Because I have to navigate myself with in-game landmarks, I started to notice details. I became immersed in what I was doing. And then that Elder Scrolls music hit, and the whole thing came together. It was an amazing experience. In fact, it was the intended experience. All of those limitations were deliberate. They worked together to craft for me this one moment. And as a result, I now understood this game better, and I was eager to engage with the rest. Whereas before I was doing it disinterestedly. My point here is that there is no way for me to have this moment without all of those limitations. I needed the slow walking speed, the low stamina regeneration, and no map markers. When I started the game, if I had been given the choice to increase movement and add map markers, I probably would have done it, because I would have assumed that those mechanics were archaic leftovers from a less civilized time. Letting me be happy, letting me do what I want, could have resulted in me never having that moment, and probably soon dismissing that game. People don't know what they want, and more importantly, player choice is not an unmitigated good. There used to be this glitch in Skyrim, where you could level your destruction magic by jumping up and down on a furnace, and then heal that damage with restoration magic. People would just sit there for hours jumping down on that fire. I know people that did that. I did that. Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. Soren Johnson. My point is that these arguments are often brandished as categorical, and they're simply not. Humans constantly do things that they regret, and they can't be expected to know what they want before they understand what a game is offering. I want to make clear that I am not making categorical statements. I am not saying people are stupid, or that they shouldn't use mods to tailor their experience. I am saying that in order to make good choices that will make you happy, you first need to understand what a game's intended experience is. Once you understand the developer's intent, you can make an informed decision on whether and how to modify that experience. And if you make that choice prematurely, you risk robbing yourself of something valuable, something you didn't know was there. From what I can tell, the whole structure of this line of argument assumes that difficulty is not important, that it doesn't contribute meaningfully to the story, to the atmosphere, to the central themes, or the intended experience. And once again, I don't think that's true. First, let me talk about the intended experience. This is Yoko Taro, the creative director of Nier Automata. According to Taro, both the story and the gameplay, along with everything else, is nothing but a means to an end. They are steps on the path to his goal when making games. For Taro, the game is not important. The game is merely a vehicle by which a message can be transmitted to the player. I quote, "We are game creators, so we make these games and share it with the person on the other side. Players will play the game, and hopefully they will feel something, an emotion. I design games and write stories, but my goal is to cause an emotional stir inside the player's brain. So the fundamental goal isn't in the game sitting in the middle. It is the event that occurs inside that player's brain. This is the goal we must consider most important." End quote. This goal, Taro describes, is the intended experience. Gameplay, atmosphere, plot, graphics, and yes, even difficulty, are tools by which the goal, the intended experience, inside the player's brain can be realized. In my opinion, Yoko Taro is a genius, and he believes that there are valuable intended experiences that lie outside the conventional gaming wisdom. I quote once again, "It has been some time since our industry started. Within the cost and time allowed, we are making games intelligently, and at the same time certain sorts of rules and standards have been set in place. Games should be played for a certain amount of hours, or gameplay must be fun, or stories should move people. Rules like these. And this we call the invisible wall. The invisible wall only covers the potential of games and doesn't allow for anything else. But is this really true? Is there nothing more we can do? For example, let's say there was a fully priced game that only lasted 10 minutes. No one would ever approve this, but what if those 10 minutes were the most beautiful 10 minutes you can be experienced here on Earth? Or another example, a game no human can clear. Can that not exist? Just thinking about these things, these ideas, makes my heart beat. I sense there must be a lot of emotional peaks on the other side of that invisible wall." End quote. Yoko Taro dreams of possible experiences past the invisible wall, and among those is a game so hard nobody can clear it. In other words, he knows that difficulty is a tool. It's a part of a developer's repertoire to craft his artistic vision. A really great example is the game Outward, which is a personal favorite of mine and the very first title I covered on this channel. The following is a developer diary that neatly explains its premise.
For many, the allure of medieval fantasy RPGs is so obvious, so captivating. This idea of living in another world, somewhere more hostile, more magical, more intense than our real lives, is a powerful escape. While visiting such a world, we want to believe. The illusion breaks down when the game reminds you constantly that it is a game. That is what happens when the game is always giving you freebies. Go venture in the wilds, but don't worry, you're half dragon. You're the chosen one. You're the lost child from a prophecy. Nah, we want to scale back things so that you live in a fantasy world, but from the perspective of an ordinary human being with no superpower and no game developer guiding you at every step.
Outward is a very specific game. It has a clear vision of what it wants you to experience. To better make my point, this is an interview with Guillaume Boucher de Vidal, CEO of 9 Dots Studio and creative director of Outward.
The audience that 9 Dots want to cater to, our profile I call the sophisticated gamer, and not in the snob sense, but in the sense of gamers who have a lot of experience, they know what they want, they have very specific tastes, and more and more games need to attract a large audience because of their expanded budget, and that means they kind of have to, like, old players are kind of leftover, or they're just not catered to foremost. They start with aiming at younger players. Why? Because there's just more of them who are actively buying and playing games. Like the most lucrative demographic in games has always been teenagers. We're talking like teenager boys, more precisely. So they're aiming at 16 to 20 years old guys, and sometimes even younger. They're the core public you want to target to if you want to have the highest amount of sales. But in the process, players that are like 30 years old, like me, I'm 33.
I'm almost there with you now.
We are not having that wide of a selection of games that are directly targeting us as a public.
Right.
And so I identified that problem, and I want 9 Dots to be like for us, for players like us who've been playing forever, and we know our shit, and we want to be challenged. We want our expertise in games to be challenged.
Guillaume and 9 Dots had to make difficult choices. They had to make trade-offs. By foregoing the largest demographic, they could focus on remaining true to their vision and providing value to their target audience. That value, that intended experience, was incompatible with an easy game. I don't think I can get away with having a discussion about video game difficulty without mentioning Dark Souls. It is, after all, why this discussion became popular again recently. Here's the thing about Dark Souls. It's not that hard, because it's not meant to be that hard. Like I keep saying, difficulty is a tool. These tools have a purpose. And for the most games, difficulty is not there for its own sake. That's true for Outward, it's true for Monster Hunter, and it's definitely true for Dark Souls. Outward, Monster Hunter, and Dark Souls are not tailored for pro gamers with fast reflexes. They're meant to be an overcomable challenge for the average person. In fact, their combat is actually more methodical and slower than most games. Anybody can beat them. The point of the difficulty is to serve the intended experience by reinforcing its elements. In Outward, it highlights its dedication to realism, and it's important to the atmosphere it's trying to cultivate. You can't have a feeling of wonder and threat without the threat. Dark Souls uses it to a similar effect. It's important for the atmosphere. It's not good enough for an environment to simply look inhospitable. It has to actually be inhospitable. It has to cost you something to progress for the sake of that atmosphere. One of the arguments that I hear a lot goes something like, do you really need the game to be hard to appreciate the ambience of Firelink Shrine? Does the fact that Sif and Artorias are hard make their story better? And the answer to that question is yes. The ambience of Firelink is accentuated by the hostility of everywhere else. I appreciate bosses better, and more fully, when they kick my teeth in. And the very central themes of the story, death, rebirth, obsession, adversity, sacrifice, and overcoming, are paralleled, purposefully, intentionally, by the difficulty. It matters that Fatalis is bullshit. It matters that Artorias is hard. In fact, it is essential. Essential to the story, essential to the atmosphere, essential to the intended experience. The following is a quote by Hidetaka Miyazaki, creative director of Dark Souls. We are creating a game that is spicy. We want to make it as spicy as possible, but still edible and taste good, so that it leaves you wanting for more. Even though I shared earlier that Dark Souls is actually more difficult than Demon Souls, all the difficulties can be overcome by trial and error. The game is like very spicy food. Indeed, it is very spicy, and yet delicious. Humans are different. We come to games with different levels of experience, different expectations, different interests. Our life circumstances afford us different amounts of time to allocate to playing. Our raw talent varies greatly. How quickly we grow and where we plateau is different as well. Once we start playing the game, we make different choices. We pick different weapons for different reasons. We choose different equipment. And we make different builds. All of this results in people having different experiences even when they play the same game. It is neither possible nor desirable for developers to craft a game where the players share the experience perfectly. However, this fact doesn't threaten the developer's vision, because the variance is already baked into the cake. Ichinose, for example, doesn't care if you use a gun lance or a greatsword, and Miyazaki doesn't care if you use a sword or a spear. Because that variance has been integrated, it won't prevent you from understanding and experiencing what they want you to. The intended experience exists inside a narrow band, but only as narrow as they think is necessary to ensure that most people receive the message they are trying to send. Which brings me at last to the idea of shared experience. I quote once again from Miyazaki. "We don't want to include a difficulty selection because we want to bring everyone to the same level of discussion and the same level of enjoyment. So we want everyone to first face the challenge and to overcome it in some way that suits them as a player. We want everyone to feel that sense of accomplishment. We want everyone to feel elated and join the discussion on the same level. We feel if there's different difficulties, that's going to segment and fragment the user base. People will have different experiences based on that differing difficulty level." Miyazaki is saying that multiple difficulties would affect his goal. It would widen the band of possible experiences past the point he wants it to go. And so having one difficulty and focusing exclusively on that is also a tool. It's a creative decision that allows him to narrow the band of intended experience to what he sees as an acceptable level. The sense of shared experience between players is valuable, more valuable than I think a lot of people realize, and it would not exist to the same degree if the user base was segmented among different modes. For Dark Souls, the shared experience is part of the intended experience, and the developer doesn't feel that either of them is compatible with an easy mode. So far in this video, I've tried to make several points. That people don't know what they want, that player choice is not always a good thing, that difficulty is a creative tool, and that a creator's intent can sometimes require the exclusion of an easy mode. But I also need to clarify what I'm not saying. I'm not saying difficulty modes or accessibility are bad. In fact, I'd say most of the time they're a positive thing. My opinion on this subject is quite common. Many games would benefit from an easy mode. Some would not be affected much either way, and for a few, it would be detrimental. The developer is best positioned to judge which is which, and should be free to do so. As far as I can tell, absolutists on either side are a tiny minority, but they do exist, and they are very loud. There are people who think that the addition of an easy mode is always a good thing. Their core central argument, which I've danced around but haven't yet addressed, is the idea that easy modes on every game would allow less adept players to experience them. You wouldn't be forced to interact with them, it wouldn't affect you in any way. I disagree, and in this last section I'd like to talk about all the ways in which it does affect me, and why people care so much. To begin with, let me explain what a good faith argument looks like, because by the looks of it, some people have never had one. In a good faith argument, both sides assume that the other is speaking honestly, and that they believe the things they say. It is the only way to have a disagreement that doesn't immediately devolve into just trading insults. First, you tell me what you think, and I believe you. And then I tell you what I think, and you do me the same courtesy. So when people say, it doesn't affect you, I'm kind of baffled. Because then why are we having this argument? Why do you think I'm disagreeing with you? It's because when you say this catchphrase, you are making an objective statement about my subjective experience. And you don't get to decide what my subjective experience entails. So when I say, yes, it does negatively impact my experience, and then I give you the reasons why, then you've already lost your footing. you are wrong on an objective level. You might not like my reasons, you might decide the harm done to me is outweighed by the benefit to others. But at that point the battlefield has already shifted. Your catchphrase has lost the presumption of objectivity. It becomes obvious that your strongest argument is flawed. You can't tell me I'm not negatively affected, because only I would know that. So with that in mind, let's talk about those reasons. Let's start with the ones I've already mentioned. It's possible that you could be harming the very people you are trying to help. Video games have an intended experience, and difficulty can be crucial to facilitating that experience. It is a tool that can accentuate many other parts of the game. The reason that people advocate easy modes is because they're worried that some people will be unable to handle that difficulty. But the problem is that, despite their reputation, most of the games brought up in these discussions are not brutally difficult. The Dark Souls and Outwards of the world are not reflex games. They aren't skill-based. They're about patience and experience. Their appeal comes from the process of learning how not to suck. And that process is balanced for the average person. With practice, even a very bad player can clear Dark Souls. It doesn't require talent. The feeling of overcoming challenge is part of the intended experience. I constantly hear people, especially Monster Hunter people, talk about and gush about the difficult monsters they fought in the past. They talk about how hard it was, how bullshit his moves were, how long they fought it, and what they did to finally clear it. These peoples will talk forever. They love talking about it. They get a crazy look in their eye and talk about their precious Bloodbath Diablos, or Sir Alan, or whatever else. And then if someone else is in that room that's fought the same boss, they'll never shut up. And they'll evangelize anybody who will listen. You have to play the old Monster Hunters, you have to play Demon Souls. And they do not stop. They'll do this for 10 years. This is part of what Miyazaki was talking about with the shared experience idea. An easy mode can cause someone to miss out on these incredibly valuable moments. They might think, well, I'm not a great player and I've heard Dark Souls is super hard, and then they'll put it on easy mode and not understand that the game is actually filled with ways to modify how hard it is. Like with me in Morrowind, it could take some time for people to understand what the game is really offering. An easy mode could be robbing them of something they don't know they want yet. Similarly, those same people today who gush about past games sometimes confess that they might have lowered the difficulty in a moment of frustration had the option been available. And they are glad it wasn't. They're happy that they have had less options. And that's not a surprise, because like it or not, the feeling of playing a hard game is fundamentally different from playing that same hard game on that same difficulty, but knowing you could change it at any time. When you're struggling, the knowledge claws at the back of your brain. It does no good to simply say, just don't engage with it. People don't work that way. They jump on furnaces for hours, they optimize the fun out of a game, they constantly do things they don't want to do and will regret. Not having an easy mode is a feature. It's part of the product. It's part of the appeal. It's one of the reasons I like it. And for some developers, it's an inseparable part of the experience they are trying to craft. My problem with this whole debate is that people on the opposing side often don't want to acknowledge that lack of difficulty selection is a feature. They don't like that I see it as a feature, and they don't like that I enjoy that feature. But a feature it is. It's a psychological feature, it's an artistic feature, and most importantly, it is sometimes a highly desirable market feature. The following is a GDC event titled Why Dark Souls is the IKEA of Games. Let me show you just a bit of it.
So those amenities, the food court, the daycare, the fact they're open late would seem like extravagances, but it means that customers can go straight from work because there'll be food there. They don't have to get a sitter because IKEA will take care of their kids. And they don't have to rush and stress themselves out about finding traffic because IKEA is going to be open late. The net effect is, once again, IKEA is better for the target customer while still being profitable. But it has reduced appeal to time-sensitive, price-insensitive customers who want customization and high quality. Again, IKEA made a choice. We're going to target these people over here at the expense of these people over here. That is the essence of strategy. So to the meat of the presentation, why is Dark Souls the IKEA of games? If it's not obvious by now, I mean that as a compliment. So let's think of the target audience for Dark Souls. A hardcore gamer, enjoys discovery, likes pushing the boulder up the hill like Sisyphus, wants depth, and wants thrilling, menacing experiences. These are gamers who want games that are like badges of honor if they win. Now, does Dark Souls meet the criteria for a competitive advantage? Was it different? Skipping ahead. Was it different? Did it make trade-offs? Did it have fit? Well, Dark Souls is definitely different. It was a hardcore, unforgiving, no-frills game in an industry of cinematic mass-market titles. I'm pretty sure that picture is from one of the later Dark Souls games, but a $200 million person body count really kind of emphasizes my point here. Dark Souls makes a lot of trade-offs. Few cinematics, almost no tutorial, one difficulty level, sparse music, limited multiplayer, and it wasn't exactly using a cutting-edge engine. Much like IKEA and Southwest, this would seem to put Dark Souls at a disadvantage until you think about fit. So the fact that there's few cinematics and very little tutorial means you had to figure it out for yourself. Tutorials are rat's nest of edge cases, cinematics can be expensive to produce. You don't have them to lead somebody by the hand, that means you gotta figure it out for yourself. That means it is the difficult game that the target audience really wants. You gotta figure out how Dark Souls works. Or you buy the strategy guide if you're a punk.
I bought the strategy guide.
There's one difficulty level means you have focus balancing. You don't have to balance for easy, medium, hard, extra hard. There's just the Dark Souls level of difficulty. And that means it's take it or leave it. If you beat Dark Souls, you have to beat Dark Souls, which means you're one of the elite, which means it has that badge of honor that the target sect was looking for. Sparse music cuts costs, but it also makes the world of Dark Souls feel far more sparse and desolate and menacing. So it's a cut that made it better. This is the essence of a competitive advantage. Limited multiplayer is focused multiplayer. And the fact that you're reusing the tech from Dark Souls reduces some of their unknowns. Known tech, experienced tech is known tech, is predictable tech, relatively speaking. So trade-offs combine to create a harsh, uncomfortable, sink-or-swim experience, which is exactly what the target audience was looking for. And From Software are genre experts. They've been making this kind of game since Kingsfield on the PS1. This really helps them hone what they're doing and hone their activities. The net effect is it felt tailor-made for an audience that often feels ignored or overlooked by the AAA games industry. And these trade-offs allow From Software to focus effort without sacrificing quality, again, for the target audience. And that means that Dark Souls can be more profitable with a smaller market. And in deference to Mr. Porter, I call this notion strategic design. Now, if we contrast this with the other game from my introduction, Resident Evil 6, and I say this as somebody for whom Resident Evil is my favorite game series ever, Resident Evil 6 tried to do the opposite. It tried to take a niche brand to the mass market. Producer at the time said, we're making games and we need to have mass market appeal to survive. And that mass market design approach, trying to target as many people as possible, meant that Resident Evil 6 couldn't cut costs and had a hurdle rate of 7 million units. In the intro, I said Resident Evil 6 outsold Dark Souls by 70%. It would have to have sold an additional 40% to make its own target. The net effect is best expressed by Resident Evil 7's producer, Masashiki Kawata. By trying to please everyone, you please no one. And if the direction of Resident Evil 7 is any indication, this was a lesson painfully learned.
Games like Outward and Dark Souls, and maybe the older Monster Hunter titles, are extra chunky pasta sauces. By sacrificing mass appeal, developers were able to cut costs and focus their efforts on providing value to their target audience. They are specific games made for a specific type of consumer. They are a perfect pasta sauce made for a demographic that for the most part doesn't have that many games targeted at them. I want to highlight a comment I saw on my channel because I think it's very well written, and it perfectly reflects my own feelings on the subject. It's a bit long, so I'm going to jump around to the best parts, but it's very insightful and a good place to end on. I quote, "I do 100% believe gaming is for everyone, but I do not think every individual game needs to be for everyone. In my opinion, the many different kinds of games we are offered are our options. Some of them are supposed to be as accessible as possible and grant lots of settings. Others serve only one dedicated function and dictate how they are beaten. Both have their audiences. Some people fall into both camps and are happy with either. There is nothing wrong with the fact that the creator of Celeste wanted their game to be enjoyed by players of varying skill levels, and thus included multiple difficulty modifiers to accommodate them. It is equally valid that the creator of Dark Souls intended for their game to offer one consistent challenge for every player who is willing to overcome. Just because Celeste is more inclusive than Dark Souls doesn't mean that Matty Thorson is morally superior to Hidetaka Miyazaki. They are making different experiences for different types of players, and it's okay if I'm not part of that target demographic. Not all games are made for me. I think the current state of gaming could definitely be better, but in terms of variety, it's pretty great. We still get lots of AAA and AA titles which are enjoyed by all kinds of people. But in the past decade, the indie scene blew up dramatically, and some games have received just as much recognition. Because indies work with a significantly lower budget, the developers can take bigger risks and make games that they themselves would like to play, but currently don't exist. Most of the time they don't appeal to the majority of gamers despite their quality, but are beloved by their niche target audience. This variety is what I want to preserve, and maybe even improve if possible. And I believe that moving to either extreme, no game with sliders or all game with sliders, would have a negative impact on that. I understand that it's frustrating when I see a game that I would otherwise enjoy, but it has this one aspect that makes it difficult or impossible for me to play. But at that point I have to realize that changing something to make it more enjoyable for me comes at the risk of making it less enjoyable for someone else. These changes are rarely 100% positive. If they alienate 5 old fans and attract 10 new ones, that might make for a good end result, but you can't deny the cost. Some people say, just include options in everything, and whoever wishes for a challenge can simply pick the hardest option and ignore the rest. Easier options don't affect you. I disagree. Again and again I have heard people gush about overcoming challenges in Dark Souls or Monster Hunter, and repeatedly they mention that if during their most frustrating moments they had been given the option to lower the difficulty, they would have caved, accepted defeat, and lost out on that satisfaction. I think there is value in not having options in certain scenarios. We should have the option not to have options. That's why I picked vote answer 3, some games should have a slider. People who want options should play those games and ask for more of them. People who want no options should play those games and ask for more of them. Both can coexist as long as neither demands to be catered to exclusively. End quote. That is a very impressive and well-written comment, so I think I'm going to let the video end with that. If you've stayed until the end, hopefully you'll better understand where I'm coming from, even if you still don't agree. I've tried to address every type of argument I've heard on the subject, and to not strawman what they're trying to say, but I suppose you'll be a better judge if I've succeeded. This topic is a kind of sacred cow for a lot of people, so I understand if the video has made you angry or offended. For those who it hasn't, I'm sure I'll get to you in a future video. So until then, thank you very much for watching.